It's kind of like having kids. When you're grooming a team, your whole job as a parent is to create good humans and humans that are capable in the world, and hopefully you do a good enough job, they love you enough to come back and hang out with you when they grow up. But you're literally getting the people that you love most ready to leave.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Life by the Horns. There's a moment most business owners don't talk about. It's not when revenue dips and it's not when ads stop working. It's when another good person leaves and you start wondering if you're the problem. Not the business, not the market, but you. And today we're not talking about marketing. We're not talking about tactics. We're going to talk about people and leadership and why good employees don't stay. So, Dustin, how are you doing today?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I can't complain. I can't complain, man. So let's unpack it, man. When did it really click for you that staff retention wasn't, let's say, an HR issue, but a leadership issue?
Oh, man, I mean, it probably goes back at least a decade,
Mm,
because I was on the receiving end of it. We were in a thriving company. I mean, it was one of the fastest growing service-based businesses in the United States. It was cool to see what we were doing, but over and over again, you saw like really amazing key contributors and individuals having marriage issues, not spending time with their family. They were constantly on the road. They were burnt out, and ultimately that led to, decisions they had to make, whether they were gonna stay with the business or exit, and, it started there, and then, unfortunately, I started to see it unfold in my leadership, years later as well, but yeah, I agree, it's not necessarily an HR issue, it definitely comes down from, top-down leadership.
yeah. So from your perspective, you said it kind of carried over on into your leadership. What did it cost you before you kind of started to take it seriously?
Oh, man. Well, going back a little bit, when I say it carried over, I really, really detested the director that I worked with.
Mm,
He was a tyrant. It was his way or the highway. I mean, you were, basically held to the fire from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., 6 days a week, which meant you were working 100-hour weeks. I think I was making less money when you looked at the amount of hours than a Walmart greeter, so that was a little frustrating at times. And you were constantly manipulated and reminded that, hey, this is a great opportunity for you and you live in a great place and you should be grateful, which is, again, what a true manipulator would do, right? And I as much as I hated that, and that was a big part of why I left, I think subconsciously I liked the idea of the growth that they were seeing and tried to emulate that in some ways in my own leadership. And I mean, I remember writing, emails to staff that weren't getting along and just basically saying, like, we're going to get to the pinnacle and we're going to get to the top. Whether you're there or not is up to you. And time again, I would bring in really great people. And within 1 to 2 years, if that, they would churn out. And for the longest time, I kept blaming the person and saying, they're not good enough. They weren't cut out for this. We'll get another great person. But as I kept watching the leadership table just change and change and change and change, the only constant was me. And I started going, well, damn, what the fuck is it about me that is pushing all these people away?
mm.
And in large part, it was because I was creating unreasonable expectations. I didn't see and hear them for who they were. I didn't understand what their goals truly were. I was using them as a pawn.
Interesting. So was there a specific person or situation leaving or a person leaving that changed things for you, or was it just like the
A couple. Yeah,
yeah.
there was, one individual I remember in a meeting, I had said something, and I don't remember what it was, but it definitely triggered him, and I could see it, like, viscerally, the reaction, and I said, "Hey, if you've got something to say, just fucking say it." And he was like, "I learned a long time ago that although I may have something to say, right now is probably not the time to say it. I may also be not be the person to say it, and it may cost me my job."
Mm.
And I was like, "Well, shit, there's something there to unpack." And then another individual, inside of the same team, I didn't take a lot of vacations during this time. I was just go, 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 go. And I remember I finally decided to take a vacation, honestly, in the busiest month of the year, right when COVID was happening and we were rebounding. And the gentleman literally quit the night I was going out of town. And I knew he did it, in a vindictive fashion to be like, fuck you. for, all the hell that you've put us through. And we had a good relationship. I think he was just burnt out from it because again, the expectation was just unreasonable. And the other thing is, when you're key leadership, you're the owner of the company, you have the most to gain. You also have the most to lose. And when you treat your people like you would treat yourself and try to run them in the ground, pushing them 100% all the time, it's not something that's sustainable. What he didn't know is I canceled my vacation last minute anyway. I was going to be there because I knew we were about to ramp up. But it was just a couple of key moments where I was just like, man, it's not them, it's me.
Interesting. So when leaders start losing people, and you've been through this season, what does that actually feel like? Not operationally, but personally
It
for you.
feels like they're leaving you. I mean, it feels for lack of a better term, a breakup, a divorce, whatever you want to call it, because when you spend a lot of time, with, these managers and key contributors on your team. I mean, you get to know them, you get to know their families, you understand what they love outside of work, their hobbies, you go out and, spend time with them, grab dinner and all these kind of things. And because you spend so much time working together, they really feels like they're, for lack of a better term, and I know it's super cliche, but like family. And then, when they say, "Hey, can we have a quick chat? Or do you have a minute?" You instantly know, like, "Oh, fuck. What is going on now? Like, God, we gotta do this again." But I think the biggest takeaway there is just the idea of extreme ownership. And most business owners, some of them will subscribe to it, they're like, "Oh, yeah, I love that." But majority of the time, the writing was on the wall. They told you what they were looking for. A lot of people, it's growth,
Hmm.
and that's not just in salaries. Because they're not going to be with you forever. And as they're putting this resume together, if they've been in the same exact role for 5 years and they're not making any more money, they're not learning anymore, they're not getting more value added to them. They're getting pressure from their spouse potentially. Hey, we've got these dreams and aspirations of things that we want to do. You gave this 5 years. We're still in the same spot. You start to question, the business owner or the leadership, and you start going, are you really doing this for me, or are you just coasting? And if you're just coasting and I'm 30 years old and I'm trying to build my career, I don't want to necessarily stay here.
Hmm. That's a good point, man. So you talked about, you felt like they were leaving you. So that's, I'm sure, I know we've talked a lot about abandonment and kind of having that. So how did you typically respond, like in those seasons where
Oh,
you're feeling abandoned? Like, what did that look like?
it was bad, man. I just remember being so down. And even contributors that maybe weren't even an A player, but maybe some of them were like, C pluses and B minuses at best. But you extended a helping hand so many times to try to help them in their personal life, with the assumption that they're going to show up better in their professional life, because you've created this connection with them. And it just seemed like more often than not, they left at the absolute worst time when you gave them so much grace and they potentially should have been gone sooner. And the funny thing is, and maybe this is just a me thing, but you probably should have let them go sooner, but you gave them a lot of grace. And then they ended up leaving you. And then you're pissed off that they left you. And you're not the one that was like, "Hey, this isn't working out," or whatever it may be. And I remember many instances, when that happened, and it's just like, man, I fucking bent over backwards for this person, and somehow I'm still the bad guy in their eyes, and they left me. And so, yeah, I mean, obviously, we've talked about abandonment issues and that kind of stuff before, so that existed there as well. But one of the things that I finally had to just come to Jesus with myself with is people are just they're with you for a season. And that season may be a month, it may be a year, it may be 10 years, it may be, like Michael and I, the co-founder of Best Life. We've been partners and been doing stuff together for 20 years.
Right.
And I don't expect that to end anytime in the near future. But again, it's a season.
Yeah. So when you look across businesses that constantly rotate their staff, what pattern are you seeing underneath that over and over again?
They're frauds. I mean, no, I mean, it's the reality. And we've talked about this a little bit before, but they have an expectation for what they expect from their team members, but they don't even expect it from themselves. And there's something I want to point out here because there's a really big difference in the two types of business owners per se. There's the business owner who owns the business, has a leadership team, Leadership team takes care of most everything. They're very passive and they're not actively involved. Again, they own the business doesn't own them. Then there's your self-employed owner operators, which is the majority of people that I coach. And where they go wrong is setting expectations and not living them themselves. And that doesn't mean that you've got to be in every day before everybody and stay the latest and everything else. But it does mean from time to time, you've got to show up and show out exactly like you expect them to and show them that, you've still got it. You can still do it. And you learn a lot when you're doing that as well. And what I've seen so many times is my guys are late all the time. Okay, well, you get what you tolerate. Number 1. Number 2, are you always there when you're supposed to be? No. And then I've seen this too. They're like, "Well, I stopped to grab breakfast for the guys." It's like, "No, you were fucking late and you stopped to grab breakfast to try to get their buy-in and to forgive you, and I'm sure they appreciated it in some capacity, but you wouldn't allow that." I never did. When guys were 15 minutes late and they had a bag of Chick-fil-A in their hands, like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I was late. There was traffic." Like, "Bro, you fucking stopped to get food. That's why."
Traffic in the drive-through, right?
Yeah, right. So, and more often than not, it all starts with the leadership. They don't set the right expectations for themselves first and then the team. They're not very candid about those, through the hiring process and all the way through. And again, going back to what I said a minute ago, you get what you tolerate.
So what do you think the biggest lie business owners tell themselves about keeping staff would be?
I think the biggest lie business owners tell themselves about the workplace today is that it's a generational problem. And I would say that yes, things have drastically changed from like the 80s and 90s to now. Back in the day, you used to subscribe to a job, you had a pension and all this other shit. You worked for a boss that you couldn't fucking stand for 30 years. But why did you do it? Because that's what everybody else was doing. And there was this like Jack Welch mentality about what CEOs should do, and it's shareholders first and team members second. That's changed a lot. And honestly, COVID really completely changed the landscape. You got to a point where, the workforce at some points was afraid to come in. And then we were at a point where there was, this, work from home model and kids were doing school at home and all these kinds of things. And so homeschool, became more of a factor for a lot of this in this hybrid model. People all of a sudden decided like, hey, man, driving to work kind of sucks. I waste an hour and a half to 2 hours of my day every day when I could get more shit done at home. And I don't have to get up as early and all this. And I think there's a lot of negative things that also came from that as well. But then when the workforce was diminished, now all of a sudden the value of a good employee went up. And so people are getting paid more money and everything. So now when their opportunities opened up, you then start sitting here going, okay, wait a minute. Now the roles have reversed. It is not me desperately looking for a job. It is employers desperately looking for me if I'm good at what I do. So they got more leverage. And I think things have flattened out more so at this time. But one of the things I've noticed, especially when we were a smaller agency, had way less resources and stuff, the reason people actually subscribed to work here is because we actually had a mission and we were doing something that provided impact and fulfillment for the employee versus a lot of other places. Like you could get paid a little bit more, but it was like, I'm going to go work in a warehouse and move boxes around and sit on a forklift all day. I mean, that's easy, but what is my impact in the world?
Mhm.
I mean, yeah, sure, you're a part of the supply chain at Amazon or whatever that may be, and people are getting their packages next. I mean, great, but for what we were doing and are do, it was like, hey, your impact is we're removing hats from small business owners so that they can live a better version of their life, and you're actually a part of that case study that shows when they went from driving a '92 Camry because they didn't want to have a nice vehicle because they had to sink everything into the business. And fast forward 2 years with your efforts and the rest of the team efforts and their hard efforts, now the guy's got his dream home, a nice little pontoon boat for his family. Business grew 220%. And people want to subscribe to that kind of stuff. They want something that's mission driven that their heart can be behind. And so many businesses don't understand that. They don't do a good job on the front end of explaining who we are, why we do what we do, and what our mission is.
Mhm. And so you mentioned the generation thing. Like a lot of the business owners are like, "Oh man, This generation, man, they just don't want to work. What does that lie help them avoid? What responsibility do you feel like that helps them avoid?
Well, I mean, you just go back to extreme ownership. I mean, it's not the case. The fact of the matter is there's a lot of opportunity in their own leadership and self leadership first. There's a lot of opportunity in, explaining the why behind what they do. There's a lot of opportunity in understanding that hiring people is a marketing play. It really is at the end of the day. No longer do we post ads that just say, here are our expectations and here are the minimum requirements and this is what you have to do. No, you got to tell them a story. You got to get them excited. And then beyond the ad, you have to do it in the app, when you're actually in the screening and interview process, like it has to live there. Like you literally have to create something that people want to come to and they love to come to. And I laugh like a lot of guys that I talk to, they're like, well, the job fucking sucks. It's hot, especially service-based businesses. Like, oh, it's hot outside. It sucks getting in crawl spaces and attics. Oh, it sucks flipping vinyl and setting up festivals and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, well, yeah, if you lead with that, good luck. Good luck getting anyone that's worth a shit. But if you lead with, the fact that, we're changing lives through X, Y, and Z, you're going to get a suntan, we're going to lose some weight. Hell, this is like going to the gym, because it's so rigorous on the body and all these kinds of things. I mean, lean into some of the benefits of it, versus how bad it sucks because you're only going to attract people that you don't want in most cases. So I think the lie, behind that, there's just a lot of avoidance from the business owner is all and just a lot of excuses that they can make. And
Mm,
if you live in this place of lies and excuses and delusion, you're never going to accomplish anything great.
yeah. So let's talk about good employees, not the lazy ones or the toxic ones. But why do you think capable, loyal people still leave the businesses, even though they actually like the business and the culture?
That just goes back to opportunity.
Mm.
I mean, the thing that I see time and time again is if the business isn't growing, they don't see growth in themselves. And as much as they may love the culture and they may love the people and they may love the company, if they get a better opportunity, and I hate to say this, but for a lot of businesses, you're only as good as those things and that paycheck. And I mean, we've had lots of team members that have, I mean, one of the tough things about being a great business is, when you have a great culture and you really lean into, training and education and making them better, you're making them more appetizing in the job market. And then when you've got other businesses that have more resources and can pour into them more, I mean, honestly, you've just helped them graduate faster. I watched this yesterday as I was chatting with another good friend, and he's the COO of a online, coaching fitness and wellness platform, and their top contributor left, and him and his significant other, and they sat down, had a meeting with leadership, and they just said, "Hey, look, we really appreciate everything, but we want to try this on our own." All because the company took 10% of their earnings, which, I don't think what these guys figured out is once you factor in credit card processing fees, administrative stuff, software, like the company wasn't even making any money on these guys. So it wasn't a huge impact to the company, but I think what, this couple that left is going to see, it's going to be a huge impact to them. But a lot of people, like this idea of going somewhere else because they've graduated from where they're at. And that's exactly what, leadership said at this company. They're like, hey, we totally get it. And they're like, hey, it's kind of like having kids. When you're grooming a team, your whole job as a parent is to create good humans and humans that are capable in the world. And hopefully you do a good enough job. They love you enough to come back and hang out with you when they grow up. But you're literally getting the people that you love most ready to leave. And that's the same thing that happens in businesses a lot. I used to laugh when talking with other business owners. They'd be like, "Man, why can't I find more guys like me?" And I'm like, "Because they would own their own fucking business.
Right.
That's why." They're and then or,
Mhm.
their key contributor's been with them for 3, 4 years, and then, "I can't believe they left to go start their own business." And it's like, "It's because you showed them everything."
Mm.
And I mean, this, I do this too. We were going over pro formas yesterday and P&L and expenses, and I even told you guys, like, I really want you guys to continue to operate like entrepreneurs, but I want you to think like an entrepreneur. And I think I think it was Richard Branson that said, and I may get the name wrong, but you know, basically, and I'm paraphrasing hugely, but like treat and educate your people so well, that they want to stay, but at the same point, when you do that, you also know that they've got all the opportunity in the world on the other side. The whole goal behind that is, that they see the value in the consistent education, the buy-in, the culture, that they're getting paid well and all these things. The company's mission driven. You hope that they stay for all those things, but and we're living this right now. I mean, even some of the feedback I've gotten from, my coach was that, your team would love for you to spend more time with them. And I'm like, okay, well, how do I buy back some of my time for me to do that? And, I'm working on that right now because I also know, and it can be a season, but when the founder who's got so much heart and love for what they do and so much know-how isolates themselves from the team in much capacity, and leadership may do a fantastic job, but people still are drawn to the ones that started it, to the renegades that are still, paving the way and everything else. And if you take that out of the mix, don't be surprised if people leave.
Yeah. Yeah, so it sounds like, is it safe to say that, if you're doing things right, expect people that you're building up to potentially leave,
Yeah.
and that's okay,
Yeah.
right? As much as you want them to stay, but as long as you have a culture of growth and pouring into your people, you're on the right path. So if a leader listening right now has high turnover, what are they paying for that never actually shows up on paper?
You have so many resources that are just flying out the window. I mean, there's most business owners don't have great hiring systems to start. So they go through the process of hiring, and I hear all the time how much of a pain in the ass it is, how many hours it takes every week, the interviews, the no show, like all these things. And again, a system can fix most of that, but most of them don't have it. So there's all the time that goes into that. And you're constantly restarting, and restarting something over and over again is crazy. And so then you get them through the hiring process, and then you get them into training. If it is a key role, you're generally not getting them trained in a couple of days. Generally speaking, if you're lucky, it's weeks. More often than not, it's months. That first for key leadership roles, that first 90 days really is just for osmosis, integration, good understanding, and then we start asking questions about why. About month 6, we should be in a really good spot for most key leadership roles. Heaven forbid the hiring process sucks, the training process sucks. You just throw them in to the fire, and then they leave between months 3 and 6. Now we just start starting all over again. You didn't even have a capable contributor during that period of time, and you were paying them. And I know in corporate America, they have figures for this, and I'm not going to try to even quote anything, but, and even, Miles, fantastic leadership coach, and also in our Limitless Leaders program, I think he quoted something that it's a 6-figure loss in most cases in larger businesses. Now, smaller, not so much, but smaller businesses, like you hire a manager and they're with you for that short of a period of time. I mean, you're looking at probably 30, 40, $50,000 in payroll loss, plus all the opportunity loss. And you start over again. And when you're constantly starting over, you're building no momentum. And when you're not building momentum, what happens a lot of times for business owners, the other thing that they don't realize is there's opportunity loss for the business. As the business owner, you're afraid to grow the business if you don't have that leadership there and you don't have that talent, because most business owners know and feel I already work too much. If we grow this thing more, I'm going to have to work more because I don't have the leadership capacity or the bench to help me do this thing. So they just kind of sit in this linear fashion for the longest time. And the other thing that they don't take into account is the other opportunity, which is I'm now interviewing people for this role. And when they say, if they're good, tell me about the last 3 years. What has growth looked like? And if you say, well, we've been flat because we've had so much turnover, the next thing they should ask is, well, why so much turnover? And for me, if I were on the other end of that, I would be going, man, I don't know. I don't know if I can fix this business and this business owner.
Mm.
I can try, but it sounds like the problem is them, versus the other end, you go into a thriving business and they're hiring for a leadership role because it's a new role now. That's something that you get excited about. What have the last 3 years looked like? Well, 3 years ago, we grew by 20%, did such a great job the following year because we integrated some new positions. We grew by 35%. Last year, we grew by 50%. This is why we have this role. We're pretty confident with this role. If we find a really great candidate, we could have another year of 50% growth. People will get excited about that, but you're not going to attract good talent if you're flat and you constantly have churn.
100%. And you mentioned that kind of 6 month window. I want you to talk a little bit about businesses being prepared for that early stage. What do they need? What do those early stage employees need from leadership to stay and stick around?
I mean, they need structure. I mean, as much as people don't want to be micromanaged, there has to be a little bit of that in the beginning. I love one of the frameworks that Miles shared with us, years ago, which was like about this A, B, and C zone that people go into. And I don't think there's necessarily timelines. You have to pay attention to capacity and follow through. So, in this A zone, you bring on a new team member and there should be great training. And training should not be, here is a 100-page manual with all of our SOPs, read it and you're good to go. No, it needs to, first of all, you start with, what you do and then the why behind why you do the things you do. And then you show them the how. And then you literally show them the how. And somebody else on the team can show them this. But as you're showing them how, then you want to start getting them involved. And then you're doing it together. And then once you're doing it together, you want them to start doing it on their own. And then you coach them through any opportunities, that exist, tell them what they're doing right, tell them where they could have done better. And then you start giving them a little bit more freedom. But there's still constant check-ins. And in that A zone, you are micromanaging to some capacity. The goal is to get them out of the A zone into the B zone as fast as you can. But they have to have the capacity and they have to be efficient and they have to do things safe. So once they're in the B zone, now you guys are kind of working more together. They're doing their thing. They're a little bit more autonomous in the process. They're asking you questions at higher levels, hey, can I do this? Is it okay if we do that? But now they're really operating more as a manager, in capacity, or maybe it's, you're in a service-based business and they're a tech out in the field, they're sufficient at what they do. But ultimately, and you're in the B zone for the longest period of time. If they're in the A zone for way too long, then you got the wrong guy, or your training sucks. But ultimately, you want to move them to the C zone. And the C zone is they're autonomous. They don't need a lot from you. If anything, at this point, you're not working together, you're working for them. And that may sound weird to people, but the reality is if you build them up to the point in which they can do a phenomenal job without you, you give them the autonomy, you give them some structure, you can make decisions, up to this much money, we can't do these kind of things that violate safety or regulations. Anything other than those things, you take care of it because I trust you. And then the only time that there's, other than, huddles and emails and, daily interactions and stuff, the only time they're really asking you for anything is when, they've got a new idea or something great and you're just giving them your buy-in or, asking questions about it, why do you think this is great or whatnot. But ultimately, you want to move people through those three stages. And that's going to create more of that freedom and flexibility that most business owners are looking for.
So you've got your early stage people that you kind of set up for success. You've got your middle stage people that are, kind of, they've been here for a little bit. They're kind of, they're not new, but they're like medium. And then you've got your long term mid stage. I think those mid stage employees get ignored the most. Why do you think that's the most dangerous person to lose on the team?
Because you've already made the investment on the front end to get
Mm,
them to where they're at, and I think a lot of times, a lot of leadership and business owners get comfortable with the B zone people, they're good enough,
mm.
and so, they let them just kind of live there. Ultimately, you don't want them to live there because the quicker you can get them to the C zone, the more that you don't have to be active in growth in the A and B zone. Once you've got a bunch of C zone players that really understand the business, the mission, how to do everything, they're exceptionally competent. They don't come to you with every question under the sun. And if that's happening in your business, you're also the problem. If they're coming to you for everything, you created that problem. And so, but once you have enough C zone players, when you are growing, which you should be doing at this point, when you are growing, they can actively work with these new team members in the A's and B zones.
Mm. And how should business owners think about their long term employees, people that have been around for those? those OGs at the company.
Yeah, I mean, going back to kids, man. I mean, that's and I'm not trying to like belittle this. It's just an analogy, but that's when you start looking at them as teenagers. They've learned how to do the chores around the house. They get good grades. They understand the expectations of being a good human and contributing to the family and society and school and all these different things. And when you've got when they're in those teenage years, and obviously they're very fragile prior to, but in those teenage years, if you've done a good job on the front end, in that toddler zone and those from 4 to 12, if you've done a good job, and I would say that's the B zone, if you've done a good job in those areas, now it's when we're having much higher level talks. For kids it's about life and decision making and the things that are going to come their way. With those C zone players, it's about business at a much higher level. And I think, at least for me, it's I think there's a lot of transparency that should happen there. I think the business owner with your C zone players needs to be a lot more vulnerable, with what's going on, because if it's picture perfect all the fucking time, if that's what we're portraying, and then the house of cards falls down, and then we surprise our C zone players, man, you lose a lot of trust. And all of a sudden they're like, wait a minute, was this whole thing fake? And so I think you just spend more time with business, high level decisions, understanding what their goals are. Because if you want to keep those people, you may be very comfortable as a business owner going, hey, we've got single location, it's thriving, it's doing super well. But if you've got a couple of C zone players in leadership and you're like, hey, and you look at your business and you're like, there's no additional growth here, you may very well find that one of them's like, man, I really would love, like, if we had a second location, like, I would love to take that on. And I remember doing this, over, oh God, it was 12 years ago. Yeah, I remember coming into a business. I wanted a management role. They gave me the opportunity. I absolutely killed it within like the first 2 months, and I was bored because it was easy. And so then we recognized that we had like a subset of 7 stores that we had serviced that were little far away from home base. Relationships weren't great because it was too far away. And then, based off of where I lived and some a warehouse that we found, we opened up a second location. We completely reinvented, or kind of like reincarnated the relationships that were there. We started thriving. Other problematic stores from the primary location we took over, like, we were crushing it. We were a very small team,
Hmm.
but we really enjoyed what we were doing and we loved the ownership of it. And then, with that, we got, this partner that we were working with, we got their attention and they said, hey, could you guys do this again in an entirely new market? And we were like, yeah. And this was a 5 months timeline, 2 months to, basically get bored because we were doing it so well in one location, opened up a new, we were there for 3 months, got the attention, moved across states to a new location, took over 13 other stores, across this market in a 9 or 10 months time period. And then, I mean, literally, we were doing so well, we got the attention of another provider that was much larger that they bought out the company. But all that was because the owner listened. He understood what my why was. My why at the end of the day was I was an architect and I liked solving problems and I liked building relationships. And at the end of the day, I needed to make more money. And how did I do that? I had to provide more value. And how did I provide more value? I had to make the enterprise bigger. So we went from like a $4.2 million company one year to a $9.5 million company the next year. And so he benefited from it. I benefited from it. My family benefited from it. The relationships we had with these stores benefited from it. So it really was this kind of like trifecta of this win 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 for everybody. And I think that's something that business owners hugely have to lean into. You think your team is winning, because you pay them well, you pay them on time, you get lunch once in a while, like, but it's got to be greater than that.
That's a great segue into this question. When leadership is done right, what should it feel like to the employee?
Save first. And I think I think, I mean, that's just, human nature in general. Like, when people feel safe, they're generally going to contribute their best, and not safe with regard to like, oh, I can just do, a little bit and I still have a job. No, like safe, like, I know I'm going to get paid. It feels like, when we have opportunity, ownership is always willing to jump on it to create more opportunities for the team. But what it shouldn't feel like is stress and anxiety. Now, in seasons of massive growth, are those feelings going to exist? Absolutely. Is fear going to exist in some capacity? Absolutely. That's natural because You don't know what the next level looks like. But even in those moments, leadership should still be there to ease some of that burden and say, "Hey, yeah, like, we haven't been there before, but you know what? We did it here. So if we can replicate it there and we have the blueprint for it, like, we got this and I'm gonna be there with you." And also remind them, like, you have the trust and faith in me, and that's why we're doing this thing because of you guys. So I think it starts with safety first, and then I think the other thing it should feel like is that at the end of the day, like, you feel like your job has an impact on the business, on the customers that you serve, and on you, and that everybody's getting some sort of fulfillment in that process. Real talk. Most marketing problems aren't marketing problems. They're business problems wearing a marketing hat. Cute, but very expensive. Maybe you're getting traffic, but it's not converting. Maybe you're converting, but your average sale is too low. Maybe things are fine, but not scaling. That's usually a system issue, not a need a new ad issue. So here's the move. Let's hop on a short call, look at your business, and see what's really holding your growth back. No pressure, no pitch, just a fit check. If we can help, we'll tell you how. If we can't, we'll tell you that too. Tap learn more and grab a time.
With everything changing in work culture, what never changes about leading people well?
Well, one, it starts with you. You have to lead yourself well. People are a mirror of your frequency. People you can get a player to be a B player just by how you show up and how you hold yourself accountable, unless they're just not a great person. And then you have to remember or remind yourself you hired them. But more often than not, and I've seen it in my own life, when I am operating at a very high level, generally, and not even holding the team to that level of accountability, whether it be my personal life, fitness, or whatever it may be, you see like, there's the saying, the rising tide lifts all boats. You start to see that happen. The other thing that never changes is that people want to be seen and they want to be heard. That doesn't mean you act on everything that they say, but they do want to be seen. I've seen in so many businesses, especially in corporate culture. I mean, hell, I've got it damn tattooed on my arm. There's a guy here in a suit with no head. And the reason that is because so many times in business they treat you as a number and you're expendable and there's somebody else that can take your job. I'm sorry, no one's going to thrive in that environment. When they're operating in scarcity and fear, you can get some short-term benefit from that, but long-term, no, you won't get anything. So, A, it starts with you, and then B, they need to feel seen and heard. And culture matters way more now than it ever did before. Because the sitting at a job for 30 years just to get my pension and my retirement and all that kind of stuff, that doesn't exist at most companies anymore. So no one's going to put up with that shit. And then there's so many other because of technology and how the world's changed. I mean, especially over the last 2 years, there's so many other opportunities and jobs for people. There's so many other problems to solve. It's so much easier to grasp skill sets now. Not every employer in the world cares about college degrees anymore. I know I don't. I care way more about real world experience and who you are as a person. And so all that stuff matters way more now than it ever did. But again, it starts with you and people want to be seen and heard.
All right, so let's head into our rapid fire round. Short answers, and you got to give me the first thing that comes to mind. You ready? Let's go. First sign that a great employee is checking out.
They're posting a lot on LinkedIn.
One thing leaders do that quietly pushes people away.
Self isolation,
Hmm. Growth or money, which retains people longer.
growth,
Most overrated retention tactic.
money.
One question every leader should ask their team regularly.
How can I better serve you?
Biggest leadership mistake you made early on.
Being selfish,
One leadership habit you'll never give up again.
putting myself first.
Hmm.
Which I will say real quick sounds like an oxymoron because I said selfish and then putting myself first. You have to put yourself first in the capacity of taking care of yourself and your energy
Mhm.
and everything external to business because it does show up in the business.
Yeah.
And then if you take care of that stuff outside, you can be way more selfless when you show up as a leader.
Yeah. That's why they tell you in the airplane if it goes down, you gotta
Yep.
put the mask on yourself first. So yeah, great point.
One more thing, and I know we just closed this out, but I think it matters. There's a lot of good tidbits of information in there, and I may be biased, but I think the other thing that business owners really lack is having real conversations with their team. And the only way to have real conversations with your team is if you have real expectations on the front end and performance markers that not only you can measure, but they can measure. Because I see more often than not, team members get frustrated because they don't know if they're performing well. And then, depending on their true nature, they may be glass half full or glass half empty. And if they're glass half empty, a lot of times they think they're not doing well enough. And so it creates a seed of doubt in them. And then, heaven forbid, you're going to let a team member go if they didn't know what good performance looked like and it can't be measured. And you're not having real conversations through the process of where they're doing well and where there's opportunities, it just creates this just sea of fog. And that is where so many businesses go wrong. I mean, I know for a fact that so many businesses don't even know their own numbers. And if you don't even know your own numbers as a business, I highly doubt your team and you even know what success looks like for a team member.
Yeah, that's interesting. And even aside from that, like not knowing your numbers, if you don't know your numbers and it's not important enough to know your numbers, you probably don't even know your team, genuinely know your team.
No, most people don't know their business. They don't know their team, and everything is just led by intuition. Yeah, I
Yeah.
shared something about this the other day, and we just did a coaching on, in Limitless the last 2 weeks about the win-win-win framework. And although it's super simple, it's got to be a win for the team member, it's got to be a win for the customer that you serve, and it's got to be a win for the business. The big highlights were in there were that there are metrics in each of those that you can track. One of the things for it's like, well, how do I track if my team is happy? Send an ENPS. All it is an employee net promoter score. Send a survey out every quarter, and it could be something as simple as, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely would you be to refer a friend to work here? You pay attention to your nines and tens, and you pay attention to your fives and belows. The sixes through eights, they're fine. Fives and belows, there's a problem. Nines and tens, those are your advocates. And most businesses, are like, oh, yeah, I think my average will be a nine something. No, it's generally around a 7.4 or something like that. So, don't get your panties in a wad if you're like, oh, I got a 75%. But really pay attention to the detractors and the attractors in that process from a customer perspective, especially if it's recurring. What does your churn look like? How long do they stay on average? Look at your Google reviews, look at your net promoter scores that you send out to your customers as well. But from a business perspective, and this is where it gets like hairy, most businesses don't understand their cost to acquire a customer. They don't understand their lifetime value. They don't know their churn. They don't know they don't know so many important metrics. They don't know their general profit margin in each service category that they have and which one to really push. And when you don't know any of those numbers, to your point, you probably don't know your people. And when you don't know the business numbers, because if you don't know the business numbers, at the end of the day, again, you're being led by intuition, and ultimately the thing can come crashing down. Most businesses understand the money in their bank account. They don't even understand their tax liability until the CPA finally tells them at the end of the year, and then they freak out, which means you also have a shitty CPA because you should have been planning the whole time. But when you don't know the business numbers, I guarantee you don't know your people numbers, and you don't know who's truly happy and who's not, and who's performing well. And again, it goes back to intuition. And I've seen this time and time again, especially when we were doing one on one coaching and flying out to see our customers and whatnot. I'd sit down with like their GM who was so frustrated and the owner who was so frustrated. And again, neither one of them knew what good looked like. And the only thing the business owner would do is, pay them more money to try to keep them around. And it feels good for a moment when you get that raise, but it doesn't fix all the friction that's there. The fog still exists. So giving your people, I mean, hell, we talked about this yesterday with, one of our roles on our team that, receivables is one of the performance metrics. Our expense line with software to revenue is something that we're going to track. One of the things that we do with, our specialist, what are, how many accounts can they manage? But bigger than that, their pay and software allocated with their role to revenue, what does that percentage look like? How many times can they multiply that? and that helps show their value. What does their churn look like, as a marketing manager, with their pods? How much, can they, from a revenue perspective, produce? There's all these different metrics, and if you don't talk about it, and it's not something that you're talking about consistently, and not every year, it should be every month, worst case every quarter. If you don't ever talk about it, people just don't know, and it creates all this ambiguity and frustration, and then finally someone comes to you and asks you for a raise, and you don't even know if they are worth it because you've got nothing to measure.
Then you start hiring or giving raises based on how long people were there, not
Right.
what they're
I
actually
mean, you don't
producing.
even know your numbers. Those raises can really kick you in the ass.
So guys, most leaders don't lose people because they don't care. They lose people because they don't realize that what they're teaching every day through their silence, their indecision, their standards that they quietly tolerate. Retention isn't about perks, it's about clarity, it's about growth, and it's about people knowing they're becoming something by staying. And so, guys, if this episode hit close to home, it probably means that there's something that you should take a look at. Probably not in your staff and probably not in the market, but probably in how you're leading. So, as usual, guys, I want you to like, comment, share if this hit close to home. But as always, grab life by the horns.